It was said that he could round the bases in 12 to 13 seconds. I think one verified time was like 13.1 seconds, but that was on a muddy field.
Welcome to episode 166 of Alberta Dugout Stories, the podcast. I'm Joe McFarland. February marks Black History Month, and over the last few weeks, we've had social media posts about past stories on legendary baseball players who broke the color barrier in their own way, including Satchel Paige, Leon Day, Jackie Robinson, and Andre Dawson. We also introduced you to two new stories, one on Hall of Famer Cool Papa Bell, and another on Dick Brookins, whose final days in professional baseball came here in our province. For a little more insight into those stories and the research that went into them, we welcome back to the podcast ADS co-founder and writer extraordinaire Ian Wilson. Ian, welcome.
Thanks for having me back.
Let's start off with the story of Cool Papa Bell and give us a little bit of the backstory here on who he was, some of the legend around him, and the impact of him on the game as a whole.
Cool Papa Bell. First of all, fantastic handle. One of the best handles in baseball history. And one of the fastest athletes that baseball has ever seen. In doing some research on Cool Papa, of course, went to Buck O'Neill, who the master storyteller of the Negro Leagues and recent Hall of Fame inductee. And he had talked about Cool Papa just being the fastest ball player that he had ever seen. Faster than Maury Wills. Faster than like Kenny Lofton or Bo Jackson or guys like that, and Lou Brock. Didn't see him mention Ricky Henderson in there. That was one name that was a little bit absent. So maybe there's some debate there. But and just some of the legendary stories around him. He did play in St. Louis. He suited up for the Kansas City Monarchs, of course, which is the gold standard of Negro League teams. And yeah, like some of the stories. One of them is actually reportedly true about, it's kind of the line that was made famous by Muhammad Ali about turning the light off and then being in bed and under the covers before it's dark. And that one is actually apparently true. He was rooming with Satchel Paige on one of these barnstorming tours and just at the hotel, he noticed when you turn the light on, the light went on right away. When you turn the switch off, there was just this slight delay, like a second or a half second. So I think the bet was for $50, which was a lot of money back then. And Satchel was like, "No, you're getting old, man. Like I don't think I don't think even you can do that. You couldn't even do that in your younger days." Sure enough, swindled him a little bit there, and so that again part of the legend. One of the other stories about him, it was said that he could round the bases in 12 to 13 seconds. I think one verified time was like 13.1 seconds, but that was on a muddy field. So yeah, just stupidly fast. And Jesse Owens, when he came back to the States after his Olympic triumphs, gold medal time in Germany, he would often, kind of go around the country racing. He'd race some ball players, and there'd be a bit of some showmanship to it. I think he raced a horse as well. He would not race Cool Papa Bell, so even Jesse Owens had a healthy respect for Cool Papa. So there's just some outstanding stories around him. And as much as he gets credit for the stolen bases, a very capable fielder, very good hitter as well. I think his lifetime batting average in the Negro Leagues was 330, somewhere in that range. You can correct me if I'm wrong later on, but yeah, that's so just a fantastic player and a Hall of Famer as well. Unlike John Donaldson, this time around did not get into the Hall of Fame yet. He was a barnstorming legend that was just fantastic pitcher, but Cool Papa was inducted in 1974, I believe. So great to see that he's in the Hall.
It's funny you bring up the speed factor and a guy like Lofton or that kind of thing. It begs that question as to when Major League Baseball one day. I know the home run derby is a big deal, but when do they introduce the fastest runner around the bases? Because how much fun could that possibly be?
Oh, I love it. I love all those ideas. The one that I love that they do, I think it's either in Japan or Korea, is the bunting competition where they have to place it in the targets. And yeah, I'd love to see stuff like that. You know, and of course you have to worry about injury and things like that. So you don't want to see guys getting hurt, but hey, send these guys around the bases, see what they can do, right? They do it in hockey, so why not?
Exactly. Getting back to Cool Papa Bell here, and obviously because we're Alberta Dugout Stories, there's an obvious Alberta connection. How did you stumble across that?
Yeah, so actually I was looking into, usually this time of year I kind of look into several Negro League stars and whether they came through here. Of course, we've done stories on Jackie Robinson. We've done stories on, you did a story on Leon Day. Did stories on Satchel Paige coming through and John Donaldson, as I mentioned. And with Cool Papa, I did look some other names up. Rube Foster was one that I couldn't find. He was, of course, legendary manager of the Monarchs. I couldn't find any links to Alberta. And then Cool Papa, I'm not going to lie, part of the reason I looked him up was the uniqueness of his name made the searching a little bit easier in terms of going back through the files. And sure enough, he didn't spend, a ridiculous amount of time in Alberta and Western Canada, but he did come through here, when he was a little bit older, when he was in his 40s. That was the other thing, is his age seemed to shift depending on the media reports, anywhere from 43 to 49 in a 2-year span. So you never really knew how old he was.
And I mean, the other thing that I always find cool about these stories, no different than with Satchel when you wrote that story, was it's not just the big cities that end up getting some love from these barnstorming tours, right? Like, yeah, Edmonton gets a visit. Yeah, Calgary gets a visit. Yeah, Lethbridge or Medhack get visits. But Hillcrest was mentioned in this one. I mean, Ponoka is a fairly common place where I know there's a big money tournament in Ponoka is mentioned at one point. I know Barhead was mentioned as well in a story. When it comes to touring Alberta, they left no stone unturned a lot of time.
Well, and I think they'd go where the money was. And in Cool Papa Bell's situation, I couldn't find, he may have ended up in Calgary. Sometimes it's just about what you can find, right? So couldn't find any reports of him going to Calgary. He did go to Edmonton. I think that was near the start. This was June of 1948. When he went to Edmonton, he was there on a Monday, Tuesday, and I think the Monday night game was 3,500 to 4,000 fans in 1948. So on a Monday night, so pretty good draw. And yes, he'd been through Camrose. They drew 4,000 people to Camrose. Went to Sylvan Lake. So yeah, not names that you, certainly not at the time, would associate with baseball. But if the facilities were there and the tournaments were there and the fans were there, that's where they'd go. And Hillcrest, I don't know what the attendance was there. I think in Lethbridge it was 1,800. So yeah, just great to see him kind of touring around the province. At that point as well, he was a player manager, and most of these games were against the House of David team, which was at some point we'll have to do a more expansive look at the House of David team. This kind of cultish team from Michigan and their whole backstory. And they were famous, of course, for a couple things: having their long beards. They wouldn't shave. So they'd have long hair and long beards, and inventing the pepper game, or the pepper ball act, as they called it, which was kind of like a Harlem Globetrotter-esque scene for the fans. So they'd do that midway through the game in the 5th inning. So yeah, just all kinds of great stories. And Cool Papa didn't necessarily get into a lot of game action. He didn't start a lot of games. He'd come in as a pinch hitter, maybe do some relief pitching, that kind of thing. But in Edmonton, they got a good look at him, and I think he went 2 for 4 with a triple and made some great plays out in the field, like just some hard to get fly balls. So
One of the interesting aspects of this, and you kind of alluded to it, is you don't necessarily know, you're kind of beholden to what we have access to, right? Because not all archives are available online anymore. It's not like you can go to, some small town, like even smaller. I think about the baseball scene around Grantham and Vulcan and that area where Pat Gillick played back in the 50s. Is they might have had newspapers back in the early 1900s, but do you think that they would be available online? Like, say, the Calgary Herald or the Edmonton Sun, those are all available on newspapers.com or newspaperarchives.com, which is what we use. So we're kind of beholden to that. And so the next question I wanted to ask you is, when it comes to the research on stories like that, walk us through that process, because it is a bit of a scavenger hunt.
Yeah, and you mentioned the two main newspaper archive websites that we use, and those are invaluable. And one of them is great for the Edmonton and Calgary newspapers specifically. The other one is great for Lethbridge, Medicine Hat. But they're not definitive, right?
Mm-hmm.
And even newspaper accounts of the day. You're left wondering. Like, one of the names that came up was from one of the Edmonton stories was George Wilkinson, running the Monarchs team at the time, and it described him as J.L. Wilkinson's son. J.L. Wilkinson was the founder of the Kansas City Monarchs. I had a hard time finding whether J.L. Wilkinson, this massive figure in baseball history, had a son named George. Right? So sometimes it can be tricky to find things like that. There are times where I'll approach some local museums and things like that. The Esplanade in Medicine Hat, for example, has some great resources and some engaged staff. Right? You basically need someone on the other end of that phone call or that email to go dig through their archives a bit. So I have had some help from places like that, but you do get an incomplete picture, right? I think you're trying to get as much information as you can and go with what you've got. But for the most part, kudos to the newspapers of the day for giving you some sort of picture, even if it was shaded in a certain way. That was the other thing that I always watch for in these newspaper accounts, is some of the language can be is kind of the racist meter, like how racist was this reporter, and you'll kind of see different variations of that. With John Donaldson, you saw variations of the N-word directly applied to his name, either in the headline or the first description of him, and then other people, I recall with Jackie Robinson and actually Satchel Paige as well, some of the Lethbridge reporters and editors of the day just saying, hey, why aren't these guys in the major leagues? So it really ran the whole gamut. The one name I saw this time around that was cringy was out of Lethbridge, describing the Monarchs as the Nocturnals, which maybe I'm reading too much in there. But
I don't think you are.
I don't know. It just seemed a bit oddball to be putting that moniker in there.
Absolutely. Well, a great story. Again, AlbertaDugoutStories.com is where you can check out the story on Cool Papa Bell. We're going to take a little bit of a break here to acknowledge our Platinum supporters. And then when we return, we'll chat about a little-known minor leaguer by the name of Dick Brookins. This is Alberta Dugout Stories, the podcast. We are honestly just blown away by the support we've received over the years from all of you. Thank you for checking us out on social media, on our website at albertadugoutstories.com, and here on the podcast. It means the absolute world to us, as we know we couldn't do it without all of you. We also couldn't do it without the generosity of our supporters, our official teammates. Our Platinum supporters are the Okotoks Dogs and AHP Academy. The Dogs are getting their roster ready for the 2022 WCBL season. For more on their schedule and how to get tickets, go to dogsbaseball.ca. And AHP Academy is growing by the day, it seems, helping Edmonton area athletes in so many ways. Learn more about them at ahpbaseball.com. And again, thank you for everything you do in supporting Alberta Dugout Stories. We're back with the Alberta Dugout Stories co-founder and writer Ian Wilson as we celebrate Black History Month with a look back at a couple of news stories that we posted on our website. And for this next section of the podcast, we're actually going to flip the script a little bit here as Ian's going to interview me about my story on a man by the name of Dick Brookins. So Ian, take it away.
Well, Joe, first of all, what's with you and the stories that are more than a century old? You seem to be taking over that role for us of exploring these stories from when this one is from 1909, 1910, if I'm not mistaken.
Absolutely it is. And I don't know what it is either. I mean, part of it was, especially with the look backs on like the Calgary Broncos of 1920-21, it was a century ago, right? And so I find those parts fascinating, and then I just end up and I think you're in the same boat. You go down these rabbit holes, and then before too long you're like, there's a story here for sure. And I think the other aspect of this, and I wanted to go back on this point a little bit from our conversation about Cool Papa Bell, is one of the things that we take a lot of pride in is being able to document some of these things that aren't necessarily documented, right? Because the internet is its whole new age, and we're able to document some things that future generations are going to be able to look back on and go, oh, cool, there's a story about Alejo Lopez or Jim Henderson or all of these different current players, but we also have this opportunity to go back in time and tell some stories that have kind of been lost over the last 100 years or so.
And well, and you've certainly done that with Richard Brookins, who went by the name of Dick, and just in the cursory research I did on him, it seems like he was surrounded by dicks.
Well played.
A very interesting and kind of odd situation, and I'll get you, I don't want to give away too much of it, I'll let you do that, but run us through what was the deal, what was the story with Dick Brookins and his situation, and certainly how it related to Alberta and Saskatchewan at the time.
Yeah, it's quite the interesting story as you look back on it. He's born in St. Louis and from all accounts born into an affluent white community, but he had a bit of a darker skin color. And from all intents and purposes, he was originally thought of when he was coming up through his baseball life, thought of as being white. Nobody questioned it. And then in 1908 is when you first started to get glimpses of some pushback because of the darker tan or skin tone that he had. And there was an actual investigation by one of the main organizations in Baseball America around whether or not he had some Negro blood or what percentage. The percentage is what was called into question. And you get a sense as to the pecking order for whether baseball players were able to play or not. You had the whites, they were allowed to play. You had the Mexicans, they were allowed to play. But when it came to Native Americans, they were kind of second last, and then blacks were on the bottom. And that's where the question mark lingered as to what percentage, if any, he was allowed to play. So in 1909, it came back into Canada's peripheral when he tried to join Vancouver. And I believe it was the Vancouver Beavers. And he was given a bit of a tryout in Vancouver, and there were some notions and some things said, but nothing was really annotated in the newspapers of the day around whether or not that was a deciding factor in him being let go. So his stats line on baseballreference.com when it came to his Vancouver stop is incomplete. There's nothing there other than, hey, he got a cup of coffee with the team at some point throughout. So that was sort of his beginnings in Canada. Fast forward to 1910, and he ends up in the prairies, Regina, with the Bone Pilers, in fact. And that's where nothing was really said about him, aside from the Regina Leader Post making some mention about how he was getting a cold response and having some racial epithets thrown towards him in Moose Jaw. And then things started to percolate a little bit more. And you get some differing reports depending on who you talk to, because the Albertan in Alberta, for example, had a scathing article about what Medicine Hat and Lethbridge were doing to Dick Brookins. There was an actual question brought up as to whether or not he was allowed to play in a game against Medicine Hat. The president of the league at the time, Ekstrom, seemed to have a bit of a vendetta against Regina for some reason. He was from Lethbridge, and I think that's where some of the confusion laid as to whether or not it was Lethbridge who had lodged an official complaint or if it was Medicine Hat that lodged this official complaint. But either way, Ekstrom really looked bad in the grand scheme of things because he didn't provide any kind of consultation with Regina at all. He didn't say anything about anyone other than the fact of, this is our order. It goes back up the chain of command to Baseball America's top dogs to say, hey, listen here. They actually had a letter stating that he was born in this affluent St. Louis community that was all white. Although throughout the process, there was some mention about whether or not he was Cherokee, which would have explained why it was a different kind of skin color. But at the end of the day, Ekstrom said, I don't care. He's not allowed to play. It eventually led to Regina having a tough go of things. They folded before the end of the season was up. Then there was some question as to whether or not there was a manager in Lethbridge who had quit and had, before he quit, released one of the Lethbridge players so that he'd be able to, because he knew he was getting a deal in Regina, so he's going to move to Regina, take this star player as well. And so Ekstrom was going to say no to Brookins because of that. So was it retribution there, or was there an overt racism? There's a lot of question marks that really still lingered when it came to whether or not he was able to play or not. But at the end of the day, Ekstrom said no, and then Brookins basically disappears into the shadows, never to be seen again in professional baseball.
There's a lot there.
Oh, a lot.
Yeah. First of all, let's start with the Regina Bone Pilers and give that name some love. This fantastic team name. But I think you're seeing some different layers of racism and some interesting complexities of race of the day. Just to clarify a few things, were black players allowed to play in this league at the time?
The short answer to this question is no.
Okay. And then just to follow up on that, so, and to kind of summarize what you previously discussed, you essentially had what a player that many people believed was a black player posing as a indigenous player, which the indigenous player would still, receive all kinds of racist treatment. But hey, he wasn't quite as bad, and he was allowed to play. Is that a fair
essentially
summary?
Yeah. That's a Cole's Notes version of this. And that's what fascinated me the most, to be honest, about this story is, and At the Plate, real big credit to At the Plate and what Jay Del Ma does with that site and what he's done over the past, I think it's like 15 years or so, where he's documented and really gone, there's a lot, and that was the challenge with some of the stories that he's done, is it's so in-depth. And our tact has always been make it kind of reader friendly, that kind of lays out, especially in these historical pieces, lays out some more of the timeline piece and gets out of the intricacies and some of the insider baseball, pun intended, with the stories. And that was what I wanted to do, is kind of lay this one out as chronologically as possible. But with that story, it kind of really shows off some of the intricacies around the challenges around what Dick Brookins was facing during those days is just the impending who knows what's going to happen from day to day. And as you read the newspaper articles from those days, and especially from the different markets, right, whether it was Lethbridge was relatively quiet, was taking a lot of wire copy on the story. They did take offense to the Albertans' recollection of it, because they basically wrote a story on what the manager of Regina was saying, which was very, very, there's some colorful language in that article. And then you had what the Regina Leader Post was writing about the story, and Winnipeg actually had a little bit to say in it as well. There's just differing accounts on who was to blame and who was responsible and that kind of thing. And that's, again, there's just so many questions even to this day around what his actual lineage and family tree looked like.
Very, very interesting just to see some of that and how it unfolded. And of course, you'd have some teams that they probably really didn't care what his lineage was, but just for competitive advantage sake, they would be trying to get him out of the league. There's what's happening on the field and any kind of edge you can get, that aspect of it as well. Now I understand as well that you were able to, correct me if I'm wrong, track down a distant relative of Dick Brookins, and did that, if so, did that clear anything up? Did you get any answers through that?
It's such a fascinating story. So this was, I decided over the course of the last, so this name came up to me maybe 2 or 3 years ago, and I've got a little scrapbook that I write down some names or story ideas that, hey, if I want to tackle this one day, have at her. And this was just the one that I was like, oh, I'll just do a quick Google search. And then I end up going down this weird rabbit hole where 3 hours later, I've probably consumed way too much content for my own well-being. But in my Google searches, what I'll typically do as well is do a Twitter search for a name. And this one seemed to be a name that wouldn't strike up a whole lot of responses. But I found on Twitter someone asking questions and saying, hey, listen, I'm a distant relative of Dick Brookins. I'm like, oh, well, isn't that interesting? And so I decided to do a little bit of background checking and that kind of thing, and ended up going to Facebook because she didn't look like she was super duper active on the Twitter sphere. So, of course, I go on to Facebook, and sure enough, I find her. Her name's Kelly Barnes, and she originally went on this Twitter rant about it as she had gone searching through her great-grandmother, who was Marie Victoria Brookins Shaw, it turns out was the sister of Dick Brookins. So distant relative, but she's doing a little bit more reading into the story and reading the different online accounts. And just as she said in a Facebook message to me, she says, listen, this was something, it was just hard to believe. She said, and I quote, I had never heard of Dick Brookins before, so when I read these stories, I was shocked. To be so talented and repeatedly denied the right to play is just horrible. She read a couple of different articles that had differing information, but he seemed to be very persistent in his desire to play. And so it kind of led her randomly down this rabbit hole where now they have some pending Ancestry.com DNA results to try to find out. Now, interestingly, she sent me a picture of an indigenous necklace that was handed down from generation to generation. Now, does that answer the question? No, but it's going to be interesting to find out. She thinks that she might get the results in the next few weeks here, so we might be able to have an update on the story before the year's out.
Unsolved mysteries with Joe McClure.
It reminds me so much of the Billy Hoolan story, right? Like, in totally different in terms of that one was, hey, this guy disappears from after basically separating from his marriage only to show up in Medicine Hat, of all places, where he helps the Med Hat Hatters win a WCL championship under a completely different name. Well, I shouldn't say completely different. It was still Billy, but it was a different last name, right? Same kind of thing. Like, there's just this air of mystery around it. And I'm genuinely curious to see how this all plays out, and even beyond that. Not saying that this story kicked it off by any stretch of imagination, but the fact that there's going to be some updates to this story makes it that much more real. And I'm personally interested in my own family lineage. I can only imagine what Kelly and her family is going through now, trying to discover some of this past that has kind of eluded them for over a century now.
Some great work on that story. As mentioned earlier, just some interesting perspectives on race was viewed through the lens of sport at that time. And, some would argue that not much has changed on that front, but very interesting study to look at in terms of how people engaged with Indigenous and Black athletes of that time.
Absolutely. Well, Ian, really appreciate you taking the time to not only answer my questions, but also to ask me questions. It was kind of weird, I'm not going to lie, but at the same time, it was a lot of fun. Hope we get to do it again soon.
Absolutely. Thank you very much.
Well, that'll do it. Thanks again to Ian Wilson for joining us once again, and thanks to all of you for downloading and listening. If you enjoyed this or any other episode, leave us a rating and review on your podcast app, as those actions help spread the word about us. We're available on Apple Podcasts, Google Play, Spotify, Stitcher, TuneIn, Amazon, Podbean, and Good Pods. Until next time, thank you for all of your support, no matter the platform, of Alberta Dugout Stories.